know, not all women's restrooms have a little lounge or couch area, so we're going to talk about why some of them do, where they originated, where they went, and that sort of thing. So when I was a small child, my mother worked in a department store called Higbee's in Cleveland, and I spent time with her there and was fascinated by the restroom lounges there. I assumed that people lived in the department store, so they would sleep in housewares. They had like all these nice beds. Then their living room was the restroom lounge. They could eat in the cafeteria at the department store. As many toilets as you wanted. So it was like this great setup and something I've always been curious about. So so today that's what we're talking about. So we're gonna flash, I guess, back at this stage in time to the Great Exhibition of 1851 in London. Here is a picture of the Crystal Palace. We also had one in New York, but this was the one in the UK. If you're not familiar with the Great Exhibition, it's kind of like along the same lines as a World's Fair. You had a country, whoever was hosting, showing their best and brightest, these innovations, having countries come and set up shop and showing, the type of technology they have. And it was an exciting time. And one of the most popular attractions at the 1851 exhibition was the public toilet. So this was the first large event that had a public toilet. And so you paid 1 penny, you got a ticket, you waited in line, you gave the ticket to in this case, woman, walked in, you saw the lounge area, some sinks, and then beyond that were the toilet stalls with mahogany seats, very luxurious. These aren't the actual ones, these are just kind of approximations of around the same time. So luxurious mahogany, the old pulling chain to flush, and they had 7-foot-long dividers between the different stalls. Now, yes, it was an exhibition. Yes, it was there to show the new technology, but also part of it was logistics, because you had all these people coming in from all parts of the UK, from other parts of Europe, staying, ideally for them, all day at the Great Exhibition, so they kind of need somewhere to relieve themselves. So it was part functional, part of the show. They didn't catch on as much as people had hoped. It was super popular. A lot of people visited. A lot of people yanked the chain and then promptly walked out again because they were very uncomfortable with going to the bathroom outside their home. So yes, but this was an example of one that had a parlor. I interviewed a design historian for the article I wrote on this for City Lab. Shout out to my editor there who okayed this whole thing to begin with. The design historian told me that part of the reason, at least in this first construction of the Great Exhibition, that the parlor part was attached to the bathrooms was, if you look at Victorian women's outfits, there's a lot of layers. There's a lot going on. And if you've ever been a bridesmaid and had to help the bride pee, you know that it's a process. You usually need 2 people, and that's just one modern bride's gown. This is just full of layers and shit. So, so part of the function of the parlor was to help women get dressed and undressed. But that's only one small component. So we're going to back up a little bit earlier than 1851 to talk about the separate spheres ideology of Victorian times. Basically what it is women belong at home, not in public, and men are allowed to go wherever the fuck they want. They get to have fancy facial hair. They get to wear hats of varying heights and, read fancy things and see the fresh air. And feel the fresh air even. But yeah, that was kind of the whole, literally women's place was in the home. So when women started to venture out in public, whether that was to the theater, whether that was to the department store, the idea was to try to create a space as much like a home as possible. Because, I mean, this is Victorian times / what half the country thinks of us now, where they think we are in our weak, women are feeble, we could barely walk for a long time before needing to faint on a couch or something. And so, if we do venture out in public, if they have these separate parlors for us with plenty of couches and seating room, then maybe our brains will be tricked into thinking we're actually at home if it looks like our house. So that was, because we're not that smart, we don't know, a couch is a couch, right? So, I mean, if you're suffering from hysteria, have a wandering womb, last thing you need to worry about is which couch you're gonna sit on, you just need to sit on a couch. So, so that was kind of the basis for that, and so you had different sex-segregated rooms in public buildings. Hotels were another example of that. This is back when the hotel was more than just a place you stayed on a long weekend. They were centers of commerce, centers of entertainment for the local people. So it wasn't just people staying from out of town. It was everyone hung out at the hotel for something. And so here's an example. This is the ladies' lounge, but because it was an inauguration party, they let men in. But you can see it's like pretty. It looks like a very rich person's living room, I guess. So that's that. Here's a men's equivalent. Dark wood, top hats, fireplace, reading. Because they were allowed to go to school. And so separate spheres, separate rooms, etc. So one of the big milestones would be this particular hotel called the Tremont House. It is in Boston. It is officially known as the first luxury hotel in America. The architect was Isaiah Rogers, who was commissioned to design this in 1828. And when he was asked to design this, he really wanted to make sure that he was trying to make Boston a center for commerce, a center where people could really get out of their homes and use the space, but also stick within the whole separate spheres ideology. So women are allowed to come, but separately. So they had, in this hotel, he designed sex-segregated parlors, libraries, a billiard room for men. I'm not great with numbers, so I've been writing down all my numbers here, which is ironic after the last presentation. So apologies for the little notebook. But yeah, he wanted women to be able to be more active consumers and participants in society, so thanks, Isaiah. Interestingly, the Tremont House was also the first major public building in America to have indoor plumbing. But they weren't sex-segregated toilets initially. Plot twist. So what the architect did was he designed a bank of 8 water closets. 8, basically they were outhouses, but inside. And they were single occupancy, you just walked in, you did your thing, you left, they were all in a row, main floor. And he kind of figured, if outhouses are unisex outside, we might as well do the same thing in here. And that was how they all started. But then, once indoor plumbing became a thing, and they had these already segregated lounge spaces, like here's some women gathering around a piano looking adoringly at each other, which is how I spend time with my friends. You had these spaces already, so they built single occupancy water closets off of these rooms, which then became, by default, single-sex restrooms. So the concept of the separated parlors predated the plumbing component, which is a fun fact you probably didn't know before today. What else we have in there? Yes, so here's some examples of some of the men's lounges. Again, they love the dark wood. Smoking rooms and billiard rooms were two of the most common men's spaces. Now, men's spaces like this, once we move more into the strictly restroom lounge part of our story, which will be soon, they didn't really exist. That really kind of then centers on women, and if men did have an equivalent space, it was really more for socializing rather than fainting. So, because they can, I mean, they're able to go in public without, I mean, right now this is, I don't know how I'm making it without. So, thank you for your encouragement. Oh, you guys are so nice. So moving forward, we're in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. Indoor plumbing is a thing. We're excited. So we still have places like department stores, or this is really when department stores and theaters and hotels really started building indoor plumbing, toilets with these lounges, or continuing to build these lounges. This is a department store in Boston, Jordan Marsh. Not only could you rest, they had periodicals if you wanted to read, if you could read. They had writing stuff, so you could catch up on your correspondence while you were at this department store. So it was a place to socialize where you didn't necessarily have to buy something if that wasn't really in the budget, but you could still be like a fancy lady and go out in the day. So, because again, like we can't just walk into public for no reason, we have to go somewhere. So department store, and women be shopping, etc. So that's where they wanted us to be most comfortable. Another example, this is one of my favorite ads I found from Landsberg & Brothers in Washington, D.C. One of their patrons sketched the room for them, so they must have been a particularly talented young woman who's in there, who had some time in her hands, and used some of their paper to draw this, I'm assuming. So yeah, that was exciting. And then also, when women started to be able to work outside the home, frequently there were these lounges where nurses could sit between shifts or eat or anything like that. So yeah, it's really just the idea of imitating home as much as possible. So moving forward to comfort stations and emergency rooms, which is not as weird as it sounds. Basically, those are just two other fancy words for public restrooms. So the public comfort movement of the late 19th, early 20th century was basically a fancy way of saying pooping and peeing outside of your house. So it was just, to allow people when they ventured out to have places to go to the bathroom. So you can still see examples of this all over America, including in New York. Bryant Park, there is an old comfort station. So this isn't exactly the same idea because most of these did not have like loungy lounges with couches. They might have a table, might have a chair for someone who was breastfeeding. But usually the women's side would be more equipped for that. What else? Here also is another example of women in the workplace. This is a plant in Pittsburgh, which actually sounds much nicer than most offices I've worked in, because you have containing comfortable restrooms, a swimming pool, shower, all necessary sanitary appliances. Probably means tampons. Actually, no, people just used rags at that time and pinned them in their underwear, but well, that's a different nerd night. So places where they could go, and when, again, venturing out of the house to work, you would have somewhere you could go. What do they call this one? Restrooms. So yes, there's a bunch of different names. Restrooms were separate, so rest space rooms, as in rooms where you could rest, literally. That's what this one is called as well. It's a paint factory in Cleveland. And this one also refers to it as an emergency room. So the emergency room component was if women had an emergency, which is basically a euphemism for literally anything that happens with our bodies, because they're so disgusting that men can't even think about, us using a bathroom or menstruating or breastfeeding or any of that gross fluid stuff. So they just called that an emergency because that's how scared they are of our bodies. And a tradition that has continued today. So it was called a retiring room, a restroom, emergency room. Basically all different types of euphemisms. Here's another restroom. This looks very bright and airy, much bigger than my apartment. Pretty nice places. Also to note, these were primarily, almost exclusively for rich white women. You did not have, yes, there was segregation in addition to by sex. If you weren't a rich white lady, you weren't using these rooms, unfortunately, in most cases. So that is also something to note. I don't know if I would have been allowed in there, probably not, but here we are anyway. So now we're in classic restroom lounges, what we think of when you go to the theater and see the couches. And this is a very ornate example. This is a theater in Columbus, Ohio from 1928. They're not all this fancy, but kind of, yeah, you want the person to feel at home. And here's another example from the Roxy Theater in 1932. Beautiful Art Deco stuff. Yeah, if you're at the theater, you need to go to the restroom. This way you don't have to run home or not go to the theater. This was at the Federal Building in the World's Fair. It's the vanity, the beautiful murals, different seating options. Then as we moved into the 20th century and even more women joined the workforce in World War I, World War II, you had even more of these lounges popping up for women to, like their factory counterparts earlier, to rest between shifts. And if you've seen the show The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in the first season, she, when she's working at B. Altman, there's a few scenes that take place in the lounge for employees. So a lot of these department stores would have two separate women's lounges, one for employees and one for patrons. So yes, and another fun thing that they're putting on makeup here. So women are expected to look nice, but not put on, but it has to be an illusion, basically the same as today. So you need to look made up, otherwise people think you're sick or have tuberculosis or something or tired. And, but you can't actually be, like I woke up and my lips were this red, I don't know how. And because you can't put it on in public. And even now, I was on the subway once with my mother and like put on literally chapstick. She's like, woo, public. And so these rooms also serve the function of allowing women to discreetly put makeup on so as not to alarm their beaux. So yeah, that was another fun thing. So as we're moving past the world wars, past like the 50s and 60s, they still were a thing. As we move into the 70s and 80s, they're not as frequent in new construction. In fact, you're kind of seeing a scaling back at that point. When you're seeing renovations of buildings, a lot of times you're seeing these lounges completely taken out in favor of adding more seats in a theater or adding more retail space in a store. So it kind of got to the point where, yeah, it was being scaled back a bit. So to look at a quick case study of a place where this did not happen was the Senator Theater in Baltimore. Here is a picture of the exterior, beautiful Art Deco building, fancy. Here's the inside, fancy, also fancy. So here's the men's lounge. They did have one. Pretty simple fireplace in case they got cold. And, ashtray, somewhere for them to have a cigarette, talk about their ladies, I guess. So that was the men's room, and then the women's room was circular, glitzy. It was basically a piece of Hollywood in Baltimore in the 1930s. I interviewed the architect who was in charge of the renovation. It was, I think, a $3.5 million, that's one of my numbers, yep, $3.5 million renovation in 2013, and I asked about the restroom lounges, and he said that was originally on the chopping block, and everyone thought, like, we could do something else, have a concession area, or, somewhere where money could be made off of it. And he was insistent on keeping them because he would explain to me that it wasn't just, going to see the movie. It was a whole event. It was you wanted a whole piece of this Hollywood glamorous lifestyle, and that meant using a fancy bathroom. So it was part of the whole experience, and he made sure that in the renovation they stayed. I don't have any post-renovation pictures, but here's another one pre-reno. So yeah, that was exciting. And there are still examples of this today in our own city and a bunch of other places. Bloomingdale's has one, literally labeled Ladies Lounge. You can't miss it. I did visit every single floor of Bloomingdale's to find the nicest one. This was the nicest one. And if you ask people in Bloomingdale's where the nicest women's restroom is, they weren't thrilled. I don't remember which floor this is, but yeah, just look for the sign. And then once you're in, you have the vanity area here again, so there's no makeup in public. Seating area, lots of bright light. This is at Saks Fifth Avenue. Today, there you go, women's lounge, you know right where to go. Very fancy couch made of a fuzzy fabric. So there's that. probably my favorite one that's still around is Radio City Music Hall. The men's smoking room is also still around. So this is one of the few examples where there's both sides still available. And yeah, this is an amazing, this is all still there. It's, you know, individual little vanities with this, couches everywhere. And, oh God, how did this exceptionally flattering photo of me get up on this large screen? That must have been gotten there by mistake. But as you can see, the lighting in there is chef kiss. And so if you're ever there for a show, I highly recommend going in and taking a flattering photo of yourself. And this is one of the other, the room you walk into before you get to the pretty vanity. So nice, very luxurious. I'm probably out of time / overtime, but in case you want to read the article, which basically I told you a version of, it is on City Lab, it was from December. It is up there, and thank you so much for listening to me talk about bathrooms.
Go to nerdnite.com to find a Nerd Night event near you, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for our latest presentation.